we constantly are asking the question, is this classical? Is this not classical? Is this building classical? Is this, we put up something, yes, this is classical. Well, in philosophy, if you want to come to an understanding of something, you need to come to an understanding of the essence of the thing. If I ask you what a dog is, and you show me a Chihuahua, and you show me St. Bernard, you show me all of these things, you haven't told me what the dog is, right? You just showed me examples of it. So what I want to do is start with, number one, a presupposition, and then a thesis. So my premise is essentially that that art is something. It is a poetry. The architecture is. It is not purely a mechanical art. It is something of a fine art. And fine arts are distinguished from the normal arts, which we know as the building arts. It's just these parts. But the fine art has its end more than just a physical artifact that you're creating. Fine art actually has for its end a statement in the human mind, human soul, however you want to put it. But what it does is it creates in people an understanding that would be beyond just what is communicated in and of itself. There was a philosopher, Friedrich Wilhelm, he said, all good art is itself and it's more than itself. And so it's not just about arranging words in a piece of poetry that makes it poetry. It's not just the sort of nice way that they're arranged, but it evokes in you an idea, a thought, which goes beyond just the words in and of itself. So you have Shakespeare, you have that, you have a painting that has, you're not just showing a picture, say, of David, but you're actually causing something to happen in the person who views it. So in that, the architecture is poetry of a different sort, because it's not a literal one. We're not depicting things in a narrative way. But what we're doing is we are getting people to understand something about the nature of being itself. I like what Justin said earlier, that Peter Eisenman said that architecture is, what was the quote again?
No, Derrida said architecture is the last fortress of metaphysics.
Yes, metaphysics is the study of being in and of itself, right?
Well, he probably just meant that there's truth and knowledge and things like that.
And so, I had a music professor, Molly Gustin, she always said that music was metaphysics. Because in music, when you're just looking at music without words, you're just enjoying the beauty of it in and of itself. Right? The sounds are beautiful, the arrangement of the sounds are beautiful. They don't necessarily have to tell a story, but they evoke something into that makes you understand the universe itself, that makes you understand metaphysics, the nature of being itself, the connection to that. So that's my my first premise is that architecture is poetic. Now the thesis that I have is what is classicism? Is that classicism, I think, can be divided from modernism. And I think it's important to make this distinction between classicism and modernism, because I think in philosophical thought, before modernism came about, there wasn't really a classicism versus modernism. There was just the thought about everything. There was the thought about the way you do architecture is this. But once there was a schism made in modernism, in modern thought, you start to be able to distinguish between the two. And that's the problem that I think we have now, is that we have modernist thought has taken over. And that modernist thought is primarily this. Before that, everyone thought the universe was what it was. The nature of things was out there, it was discoverable, it was knowable. You come to know these things and you find them and you find beauty and you find harmony in them. And then in modernism it said, that's not true. There isn't an order in the universe and I'm going to create it. So that's the thesis that I have to begin with. That modernism is distinguished from classicism, and that's the absolute basic fundamental thing. And this applies to philosophy, it applies to art, painting, architecture, etc. And so what I wanted to do was just start with those things and have a discussion. Because like I said, I have nothing prepared for this, and it's post-lunch, I'm tired, my thoughts. But I think it's important that we at least try to have a discussion about the nature of classicism, and particularly in regards to architecture itself. And like I said, I think that distinction in and of itself is the biggest one, and the one that really sets it aside, that says, if you believe that there is a beauty out there. There's something out there in order to understand, to imitate, and take part in, to poetically allow you to resonate with that. That's a big thing. So.
Okay. I want to strenuously object to limiting the language of architecture to only one expression, which is beauty. Because by studying the 260 orders, I find that actually the language can express an enormous amount of things. Like, for example, it can obviously express ugliness, which it can, for example, in the design of jails and so forth. But it can also express lightness or weight. It can express sadness or let's party. It can express I am urban and I am rural. It can express I am Swedish and I am Spanish. It can express I am near the water or I'm near the woods. It has an it can express, I mean, the whole thing about beauty is, it's not that it can't do that if that's what you're interested in.
Right. But it's not limited to that. And
oh my God, there is nothing it can't communicate. And the beautiful thing is that it communicates without training. You just basically put two buildings in front of Joe Schmo and say which one is in the country, which one is a house, which one is civic.
But how do they know that? How do they know that?
Because there's a word for it, which is, it's almost like existential. You just know, and that's the miracle.
But isn't it through experience that you know that?
No, it isn't. It's like, it really has something to do with the human body.
It's the experience of the country or the city.
Somatic?
It's what?
No. Somatic?
Okay, that sounds, what does that mean?
No.
That means when it's felt by your body.
I'm trying to think of the same word.
But
it's a word, it's experiential,
you have to.
it's not existential. There is a word that Seneca Salaya told me, which is, it's intrinsic to it. It has to do with the human body. Like, for example, I know that he's a warrior and he's a scholar. Like, you would just put two people together. Okay, who's the warrior, who's the scholar?
And they're naked.
No! No, you can't, it doesn't make it with the dress, it's like there's no problem.
Right.
Because one is wearing a bow tie and the other is wearing an armor plate. But, okay, that's it, they're naked. But you can, when you put two human beings together, you say, that's the architect, that is the whatever, that's the gardener.
You might say
They have an incredible ability to communicate without any training at all.
you have it what you're speaking about though is something that's instinctive, right? You're speaking about being able to instinctively know things. And I think there's a certain grain of truth to that, right? Because this is what we were talking about earlier, about how when the kids go to the architecture school, they have to be beaten to like modernism.
Right.
Because intrinsic to their very being, they see what's out there. They see the lovability, the beauty, the expressiveness, whatever you want to call it. I think you're right to say it's not just limited to beauty. But I think, like I said, architecture is a poetic art.
Yeah.
There's a poetry to all of these different things.
I'm going to stick with beauty for just a moment here, because it is a recurring theme on the Trend Art list, and it's something I've been thinking about. Usually, when the conversation starts up about beauty, and whether it's an appropriate goal, or the discussion turns to how do we define beauty, and then the goal of architecture is to achieve beauty. I think we're in a situation now where we're getting to learn enough about how the human mind works, how the evolutionary mind has worked, that to me it's starting to look like beauty is a metasense. It's sort of aggregating subconsciously and evaluating whatever it is you're looking at on a whole range of levels. And that beauty is that sense of congruence, of integrity, of fitness for purpose, that several channels are hitting the goal simultaneously.
Right.
And taken from that perspective, I see beauty then not as a goal, but as feedback, a guide that you're hitting, that you're getting it right.
Right.
The Victorians called it sublime.
Yeah.
That you seek the sublime. And by the way, it is, in fact, Christianity that created the concept of beauty. That's the one thing Christianity has offered the world. And music, art, and architecture all came out of Christianity, and it was this essence of trying to achieve this sublime, this concept of this God, what is this God, this Jewish God?
Who's inexpressible, right?
But it's something that we can all recognize when we see it.
Right.
It's something that moves us. When we go to a concert or see a beautiful painting, Raphael,
People are raging in
Yeah.
none of them.
I think I've read things that it's a lot about seeing something, you see something, you say, oh, you can see how what you saw got where it was going to go, and then you thought, oh, I didn't see it that way,
So-
versus just like, where the hell did this come from?
The way I see all these rules is that somebody has been able to identify these sublime, put their hands around the sublime from the point of view of the arts, and codify it into measurements. Just like coming to Charleston and taking measurements of streets and so forth. And so it's really just guidelines. It's not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to respond to what we're both saying there, and I think it's in agreement. Is that again going back to music, the wonderful, beautiful thing about music, and I'm saying beautiful in a analogous way right there. But talking about beauty is that there's an order to music, right? It starts with it starts with a fundamental melody, and then it turns into intervals, and then those intervals become in time they start to arrange into a key. The keys start to get relationships when they start to change with each other, right? But it begins to build up this sort of relationship in your mind, so that when you're listening to a piece of music that you've never heard before in your life, and the second oboe hits the wrong note, guess what? Everybody knows it. And how is that? How is it? It's this ineffable sort of thing. It's not a rational argument that you made. It's not you adding up.
Here's the posit this, that I think the transfer of weight.
But I'm saying it's music
It's
you never
fundamental.
heard.
The
It's
transfer of weight.
fundamental. You hear the original.
Oh, I know, but also because we stand up and we hold things up and so on. I think that the transfer of weight, of bringing weight down, of the bearing, and what is to be born, being brought to the earth, and how that's done, is as fundamental as that note. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, and the modern materials cause you to do things that levitate or don't, to the human impulse make sense.
Yeah.
It's
So,
really
but
common.
what
But also, atonal music is exciting and so forth too. For some people, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just that I think that ability to transfer, bring weight down, and also the resolution of horizontal and vertical, okay, and plaiting, and shedding water, and the differentiation. They're fundamental things that we know. The shirt does this, the pole does this. So I think that humans, actually, I feel it in my skeleton.
Yeah.
Something is not, like I know that this is way too much.
But getting back
Like,
to
this is not a cool thing to do, But I can hold something up that is absolutely profoundly
But it
satisfying.
responds to your nature. It responds to the nature of who we are, what we are.
What we are.
Now, there are things that respond to our nature as just as human beings and in our physical form, right? And in the building.
Have you
right?
seen the gallon jug of Coca-Cola? That you drink from it?
No.
No, but look at this. Look at this guy. I look like a big warrior. Like, this is a classic. Do that with a gallon jug. I mean, it's like, it's wrong. It's profoundly unsatisfying. You're a redneck. Something's wrong with you with that gallon jug.
But I think
Sorry, but
the
I
sublime
want to steer this back just
Drink from
quickly.
giant
The sublime is an emotional, it's a response that draws on your
No, the 2 liter soul is a 1 liter bottle of
It
Coke
makes
is
you want to
actually
become a
quite
better
nice
person.
looking.
It's like Evan Burke
It's
says,
curvy.
there's a
I don't know,
royal family.
A lot of these
Just-
things,
This
though, are
is so traditional. This
the
is
music. There's different
embodying
tonal
our
scales.
issues.
Hang on, we got 2 conversations going here. Let's try, just for the tape, let's try to get one. I'm going to try and moderate this.
Oh, we have Steve in the background here.
I think though we're getting away from the topic of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think what I'm trying to steer it back is that you know, what Andres said and what we said is that we're trying to, the poetic arts are dealing with things that are in our nature, right?
Yeah, but there's plenty of, I mean,
Yeah.
this doesn't, to me, help much about talking about classicism versus modernism. Sure, this might distinguish deconstruction from everything else, but plenty of modernists believe that there's a human nature and there's truth out there, and they could be diehard Marxists, and that's why we need to have the modular man, and this is getting at the essence of reality.
Right. But we're speaking for the most part. We're not. There are exceptions to anything. There may be a modernist like that, but what I think we're really getting at though is that, I mean, they don't admit that there is such thing as beauty, do they?
Yeah.
Sure.
They believe it, but they think that it's personal.
Right. Right. Let's go on that.
He said that
He
beauty
didn't
is the corner of truth.
Okay.
Okay, but he
But that's
was,
St. Augustine.
No, there are plenty of modernists who believe in
classicist.
beauty, they just disagree about what is beautiful.
sure, right.
Like Anton Beveren thought that someday the postman would be singing his
They feel
tune.
comfortable with that word.
Hmm?
They feel, I live with those people.
They're-
You're talking about
They don't
some
like that
modernists,
word.
but
You
this is
can't
the
use
problem
the
with
word beautiful.
this is the problem with the definition. If you're going to include everybody, it has to be defined in such a way that you can't have exceptions. There are plenty of modernists, I mean 10% or whatever, who believe in beauty, so therefore you can't define it in such a way that that's where the dividing line is.
There isn't one modernism. There's a huge
Okay,
history of modernism.
that's also true.
All the
Some of them
people
do,
in
some of them
MoMA
don't.
today that are looking at modern art think that's beautiful. They're standing there saying, oh, that's beautiful.
Right.
And it's young people, children,
And you have to-
young families,
I
they
think-
all think that's beautiful.
I would distinguish between what the people believe and what they build also, right? So they might think it's beautiful, it turns out it's not beautiful. You can have people who think they're building something ugly and they're actually building something beautiful. It's the work is what it's about, not their intention ultimately, right? I don't think you can be,
Well, I think that
odd
you
thing
can
is
separate
like
this
the
out
architects
here.
in New Orleans, they like all the historic buildings, they're all beautiful.
I take that back, but okay.
But you can't build like that. There's some divide that says.
There's an ideology.
It's off
So
limits.
here's one definition. When we were trying to get to build in New Orleans after Katrina, Reed Kroll, the dean of Tulane, stopped us because he said, and he got hold of the developers and everybody, and he literally stopped us at the boundary. And he said, because you're going to come in and you're going to turn everything into traditional architecture. So I said, fine, I get it. Yes, that's probably true. But I'll tell you what, I'll write a code that actually codes modernism. I'll write a code that codes modernism, and that'll be the condition of my coming. And I couldn't write a code that codes modernism because there's too much modernism. But you know what I found? Is I could code a series of prejudices, things that are not allowed, that actually define all of modernism. There are certain things that you cannot do. Modernism actually defines itself as a series of prejudices.
It comes out of
Things
anxiety.
you can't do.
It's
It's
born out of
very
anxiety.
interesting. It's a negative.
So this is an
definition.
interesting.
Bruno Zevi refers
It's an
to modernism as anti-traditional architecture.
Right.
Right. So this is an interesting
Yeah.
distinction. And go back to Weber. What is the thing that he won't allow? He won't allow you to stick in the 8-tone system. You have to go out of that, right? He says that's not allowed to be tonal. You must be in the 12-tone system. You must be. You're sort of destroying things, right? You're destroying. You're coming up with things, and you're creating now essentially a new system.
But you know what I found? Okay, so by the way, it has to do with coins and what they call graphic trim, and what they call, for example, and it depends on the modernism. For example, you may have noticed for the last 10 years you can't do a vertical column, only an angled column, period. And by the way, there's a prejudice against brick now. Brick used to be the material when James Sterling was around. Now, it's very hard to find a brick building by a modern. It's just not done.
Well, he did it because it
It can be coded in 15 minutes. I have it, I've done it. Okay. But then you know what I find about when I show stuff to traditionalists, they also have a series of prejudices. Period. Like, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. I say, why? Why can't you do that? And what I find actually defines the two orthodoxies, which for me are as clear as I see you right here, is the fact what they do not permit, what they do not allow into their canon. And by the way, it is so narrow. What I love about the situation is that the modernism, they're both cornered.
Right.
And then there's this field in the middle that's huge that no one is contesting.
Right.
It's not even defended by the modernists. It's this field of
And I think
forms and shapes, and that's where we should take it.
Yeah, and I think this is why we're having this discussion. I want to have this discussion because I don't think if we can content ourselves with just fighting about who the orthodox are in between, we're not getting in there. We don't even know where the battle lines are drawn right in the middle.
Right.
And I think what our ultimate goal is, if we understand what classicism is, if we understand what it is, then we can start to understand and be able to set up a very sort of simple set of ideals that we're going to, and then the variation on that is virtually infinite. I mean, that's the thing, when the modernist composers abandoned tonality, they limited themselves to a certain music, and it sounds all the same, right? But the expressive range of ability there it's entirely limited, but in tonality, it's limitless, right? And there's room for debate.
So you know what happens? So country music and the Beatles took over. It's that territory in the middle that no one was.
But the thing is the country music and the Beatles and Mozart, they're all tonal.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all good, and everyone responds to it, and everybody hears that tune, and every single human being can listen to that tune and say,
Stepping back,
your taste on it might be different.
For an anecdote, I have a 16-year-old son, high school sophomore, who plays clarinet. He's been playing clarinet forever, and he has suddenly, this last year, taken it seriously, and he practices probably 2 or 3 hours every day. He just got into the state band, and he's the first person from his high school in the whole history of the high school that's ever accomplished that. And it was only because he practiced 2 or 3 hours a day, every single day of the week. So what I'm trying to say is that there's kind of a minimum bar that you have to reach, and then once you've reached that bar, you know how to put things together so that anybody can speak them. It's like a language.
well, I think
What you do with that, you're on your own.
Right. I think it was, I can't remember, it was Chesterton who said that the rules are the fences that allow good ideas to play. Right. And you make the fence really, really big, right? And then you can play, and you can have all sorts of fun.
I got another good musical analogy. Grew up, the Allman Brothers band, random, classic rock. I remember out, a musician, play guitar myself, and really in the Allman Brothers. I remember reading an article, Dickie Betts, guitar player in the Allman Brothers, talked about all these people are trying to learn how to emulate our style, play like, get our sound. What they don't realize is they can't actually learn how to play like us by just playing our music. They have to realize that we learned our sound because we played the music of the old blues guys from the 20s, 30s, like they were playing Elmore James and Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon and all that. And so it's like you actually have to understand and practice and emulate to then be able to.
There's a very distinct advantage we have that's based directly on this. When I was learning architecture, Michael Graves didn't teach you Michael Graves. He taught you Le Corbusier. The teachers led you to the great masters. What happens now in modernist architecture is that every teacher, 27-year-old, is the master himself. And they actually hide their sources.
Right.
They do not tell you that this idea came from X or
They're
X.
hiding the works.
We actually have no problem leading our students to the masters,
Right.
which is an unbelievable advantage because it means the professors don't have to be geniuses either. You see, that idea that you can actually bring forth the master.
Right.
It is learnable. That's what's so horrible is that in the late 19th and early 20th century, which I say over and over and over again, are proof. The incredible high quality of buildings that got produced by no-name-o people that you've never heard of,
Right.
that make it exhilarating to walk
My
around.
house, which is completely brilliant, was done by, not by me.
Okay.
It was done by a 24-year-old in 1927. And I've never actually seen a better house.
Right.
It's just like, excuse me, it's a little house, 160, and everything about it is for proportion, everything. And I've lived in it for 40 years, and I said, how did they do this? How did they do this kind of education? And we need to actually go back seriously to say, how was that person, Marionson's wife, how was he produced so that at 24 he could do brilliant work?
and a very
Exactly.
basic
That's the
level.
fundamental problem with artificial education today.
Right.
Well, that's it, The idea that you can actually just breeze over all the history and then just try to design whatever you come up with that is just outrageous. You know, the analogies to music and law, every other profession except architecture, is so powerful. It's like, if you really step back and think, would you not, like, you know, the classical pianist, you know, if you don't actually, you know, if you're going to learn how to be the best piano player, you learn how to play Mozart, Beethoven. You know, you learn that lick for lick.
Right.
Maybe after you mastered the masters, and you begin to kind of add your own things.
I think-
But if you like,
I'm sorry, you were saying at the beginning about art, this is art, refined art, we're this.
Right.
And I think you want to get out of that conversation, because that conversation's been taken over by the art world. This is art. It's really removed itself from the craft.
Yeah.
And when architects are tied to the craft, you really have a basis from which you are building that tradition, that earning your stripes, apprenticing, working your way up to the basics
Yeah.
that you've left behind, and with modernists left behind. And I think it's screwing up because the public doesn't understand. Are you an artist? I need somebody just to help me.
Well,
I think there's
give
an
touching on that, I
proportions.
think one of the key things that classical architecture has is an innate comprehensibility. There's an ability to look at it and understand the fundamentals of what you're seeing. And that is essential. If you look at what differentiates classical architecture from traditional architecture, one of the key items is a rich vocabulary where every element has a name, every sub-element has a name, the relationships between the elements have names. And with that, you get what people most often find is ground for one-upsmanship. I know more architectural terms than you do. But I think at its core, what you have is a notational system for the economical transfer of architectural knowledge in verbal terms, that it's conveying visual information, and with great subtlety, because you can not only specify an ionic column, you can say quadrostyle in antis, you can define a proportion, you can give a base profile, you can
Right.
you can
common language.
you can augment or
Right.
diminish
Right.
the spacing, the diameter.
It's a knowable skill, and I think
you can convey.
I think these 2 points are related really well, because, and I think I want to half agree with you and half disagree with you, because I think you're right insofar as architecture needs to understand that it's a knowable skill, right? These are things that you can pick up and you can learn, you can know, right? But on the other hand, I think we actually want to go into the world of art and tell them that they're all wrong, because for me, architecture it's built on a base of knowing how to put these things together in a decently rational way, and that varies widely, right? But when architecture really gets exciting, is still my favorite place in the entire world is the back of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And when you stand there and you realize, and you see the mall down there, you're stretching down the mall, and you have the Washington Monument, and you have the Capitol. And when you turn around, this is why you have to walk to the back. You have to go around the back and you see what's there. Well, when they built the Lincoln Memorial, they built a bridge across the river. And what's at the end of the bridge? Arlington House, which was Robert E. Lee's house. And that's Virginia. And Virginia was part of the South. It's seceded. And you have Washington on one side. So what you have there is you have Lincoln is the linchpin between Washington, the capital, and Lee, the South, between the North, the South. He's the man who kept it
Is
together.
that story told?
No, it's
to
never
everybody?
told. It's never
Well,
told.
it can be.
It can be. And that's
it's an
why
architecture of par long. It's an architecture. And you can see the person coming in, the guy from Ohio with the child and explaining that. That's at the level that classicism can communicate.
Exactly. And this is
always
why
have
it
to keep
becomes
in
an
mind
art.
the guy with the child. Look, and here's Lincoln, and that's Robert E. Lee's house, and there were enemies, and that is, and no more than that. That's where it's powerful.
And this is the poetry. This is the poetry that architecture is. And this is what modern art, qua art, has lost. It's lost an ability to intrinsically communicate ideas. And this is what architecture can do. It can do that, and it does it through either through something
But
that's
when it's
intrinsic to us.
populist ideas.
Populist
The
say it
coming
can be any idea.
century has two phenomena that are new. First of all, the people, very often uneducated, have a great deal of say. Not only because of democracy, but we all feel it when we actually try to get a building permitted or we do a charrette, whatever. The people have never had more say. That's number one. And two, they actually have economic power to make decisions. And that's what actually confronts some of us. Like, for example, you might know that I hardly do any buildings in our towns. Okay, in our towns. Why? Because our architecture is not popular enough for the customer. You know, and they will actually go to another architecture, generally more vulgar. More of a whore of an architecture. You know, when we're competing at 1,700 square feet, you know, and I'm designing a virgin, a Greek virgin, and there's a whore down the street with heels and a big ass, they go to the other one. And since I don't want to, since I'm not that
You understand everything. It's a great reveal.
So since I'm not that interested in bankrupting clients who trust us, because remember, you have clients, you bring the client along. The urbanist has customers. I never meet the people. It's totally different.
Yeah.
If you have a client, wherever they begin, first of all, they chose you. So there's a modicum of sophistication, and then, you know, this dialogue in which you're supposed to be listening to the client, you're actually training the client. Okay? By the way, a client is different from a patron, which is what Gary get, right? Gary, whatever you want, will suffer for the sake of art. Urbanists have customers. I'm not there in the sales office
We have
explaining.
patrons and they don't suffer.
What?
We have patrons.
Yeah, you might. No, but I'm talking about the Gary, the people who are willing
Oh,
to
yeah, if
actually
you go to
overpay for
Stern,
buildings.
you're suffering.
So there's three things. In architecture, when people say, well,
Well, I care
you
about
know,
Yeah.
for example, I have an enormous admiration for the dozens of architects who build in our towns. Okay, and when it's not great, like for example, Liberatos goes around saying, oh, you know, the details are shit and ion. I said, you know, I'm sorry, but these are customers. These are people, Liberatos isn't in the, you know, I'm not in the sales office explaining what a cornice is. We're competing with the most incredible vulgarity and we're winning. Okay? That is a different discourse. What I think is that discourse, which is the customer, is new. And the 21st century is all about the customer. And classicism connects with the customer fantastically well.
And why is that? I want to know why that.
I'll give you an example, okay, just because this is science. You do 5-4 in the door. You know what that is, right? It's a house that has 5 windows, 4 windows and a door, right? The door's in the middle. And you put it for sale. And then you build another identical 5-4 in the door, and you pick up the thing, you look in Traditional Architecture magazine, whatever it's called, Traditional Builder, and you order up Doric portico number 5643 that's 8 feet wide. Okay, and it costs $15,000, prefab. Plastic, wood, I don't care what it's made. And you whack it on. You've added, it costs $15,000. That house sells for $40,000 more. Okay, there's a $25,000 value added. Value added. Now you get a modernist architect and say, do what you will, and they'll put in a corner window some steel shit. And it will cost $40,000 more and sell for $40,000 less. And which you can see right down there in the, you know, that little project of side yard houses that is not too far from here with the steel, with the I-beams. You know what I'm talking about. Nobody could buy that
Thankfully,
shit.
no, but.
Let me pose this question.
No, but let me say one thing. We have to focus on shit like that even if it isn't elegant.
Now let me ask you a question then. If
Because that's all
money
they want to
aside,
know. Does this add value? All my clients want to add value. I'll do anything you want.
What
But
about
just
commercial-
making
what
sure
about
it adds
commercial
value.
building?
What?
What about commercial building?
Well, like what, office buildings?
Yeah, like if you add traditional cladding or skin to a commercial building. to
Okay,
add
like a
value
shop?
to it. Anything.
I can tell you exactly what happens because I do it all the time. It falls out of date within 15 years. It falls out of date. I'm sorry,
For
but
a shop.
buildings have to be refacaded every 15 years for shops. And that's human nature beginning. There's nothing you can do about it. They're all torn off and you start again.
King Street.
15 years.
The
Only last
ground
15
floor
years.
gets
And you
replaced
can
every
see
5
that
or
the
10,
entire
15
King
years.
Street is completely out of date.
Second, third,
Wait a
fourth
minute,
floors, no
I walked
change.
down King Street yesterday,
Yeah.
and actually, I've driven down it in the past. I never noticed how it's all these Williams-Sonoma, shopping center
Yeah,
stores.
but they had to tear them
First
out.
floor, rip
To
it
do it on
down.
the first floor, but
Second,
they,
third,
but
and then
they
further.
still look
Yeah,
like.
I know, but that's new. That wasn't what was there before.
But I think
Well,
that's
but
not
the other
Michael's
thing I want to say
Robert,
about that.
Robert, he asked a question.
Yeah.
Okay, the word is by all the, and now we do shopping centers all the time. Okay, we're doing them, and we did it for LVMH. Okay,
Let me
the top
re-ask
people, you know what they want on the first floor? They don't want any architecture at all.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what's happening now? Okay, and if you want to not lose a job, let me tell you what happens. When a client comes in and says, I want to do a shop, you say, fine, I won't do any architecture. Okay, at all, any architecture,
Let me
because
ask
what
this question
sells
again.
is a glass wall and you merchandise in depth.
They want the
They
focus
don't
on
want
the product.
anything interfering with the merchandise, and furthermore, and they told me this because we just did, LVMH is the #1 retailer in the world. Every time we did the least bit of architecture, they would come from Paris, all the gay guys, and say, actually, we met no architecture. And it was down to nothing. I said, could we at least grow a little ivy on the edges? Well, maybe, as long as you can tear it off. They didn't want any architecture at all. So the answer is, we are actually terrible at commercial. And what's more, you show me, show me.
No, he's not talking about store.
I'm not-
I'm talking about like an office building.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's say
show me a good one.
developer.
Show me one good building of 8 stories that's classical, that's recent. One.
I think Roman Williams.
This is what I'm
I
asking.
mean,
Maybe.
depending how you define, well, no, I picked him for a reason. Like, I spoke with Stephen Alish, and he says, I'm dealing with these young hedge funders, and I explained to them, if you make it look nicer, it will be more valuable building. And he said they flipped the building before it was even completed because.
Yeah, well, you know what, it could have been a piece of shit and they could have flipped it in New York.
No, I know, but-
I'm sorry,
no, but-
all rules are suspended in Manhattan.
But it is not shit.
Oh, come on. That's no true stopping fallacy.
No, that is completely true.
Wait a
That is
minute.
completely true. It will
Andres,
sell
you
in
said that a
Manhattan.
building was shit because it's in New York?
No, it sells
Because
anyway.
you can sell anything in New York, but those are not terrible
It could have been a piece of
buildings.
shit, it would have sold anyway.
Are you saying that Roman and Williams' stuff is shit? I don't agree.
No, but it could have been shit and it still would have sold.
But that's not what you asked. You keep shifting things.
No, I'm
You
not,
asked that.
Bruce, I said, show me one good high-rise building.
I just
You
went-
said taller than 8 stories, and he gave you one.
Okay, there was one, show me another one.
Well, but that's what your challenge
Okay, I'm
was.
sorry, stop being so Talmudic. Okay, I'm sorry, but it's, you take it, I'm saying, I mean generically, there's nothing but shit.
There is no single generic building. You're making
Yes,
an
there is.
argument.
They're
You
tall,
keep shifting
classical
and shifting
buildings
and shifting.
don't work out. I don't. Okay, I'm not running a Talmud. We don't share culture. Do you get that? I'm a Cuban.
Okay, hold on.
You're not running anything. This is supposed to be a discussion.
Oh,
He
God.
answered your question.
I want to bring this
We've never
discussion.
communicated properly because we have different discourses.
Now, we're gonna
Okay.
stop a second.
Try to get at the meaning behind what I'm trying to say. We haven't worked out, we have yet to work out a classical building that's tall. This discourse hasn't done it. The
He
Fort
gave an
Control hasn't
example of
done
one.
it.
Wait a minute, you mean contemporary building, it's not the
Now,
Woolworth building.
You
now.
asked for one building,
Today,
he gave you
there's
a
nothing
building.
but shit
Do
in
you
the
have
world.
another building?
I want to bring this back instead of talking about economics, and I want to take it back to the house economics.
I'm still looking for one.
Is that you say the normal person would take your 5-4 house and they would put on the portico on the front of it because they can flip it and they get more money.
Right, and that's all that counts. That's
all.
all we need to say.
That's not all that I want to say.
I know.
want to ask. I
You
want
can
to ask.
confuse the matter, but if you want to win, that's
Well,
all you need to say.
Well, I'm not interested in winning an argument or not right now.
No,
I'm
to
not.
win, if you
Because
want
I'm interested in
classicism to
talking-
win, you have to say that's value.
Okay, well, I'm not in here in discussion. I'm asking what is classicism. So I'm asking you, why is it that someone would want that apart from cost? And I think they would. I think the person would take the traditional building. They would take the one with the portico of it. And it also, referring back to cost. You put this on there for $15,000, you get $40,000 more. The money actually says it's worth more to them, right? It's just an add-on. There's something to it,
Right.
There's something that's in the person's either it's intrinsic to their being, or it's something that they've come to experience and love, right?
Not unique to them, but to.
Right.
Exactly.
It's only a
Exactly. Exactly. And so that takes it.
They know that other people will appreciate their same values, that it's
Exactly.
communicating their values to a wider market.
Sure.
Right.
Well, actually, if you scroll to the top left,
I
I didn't remember how
think we can
tall it was.
agree
but
that there's
No, that's
a
by
classical
that's our
language.
town.
Corey,
That's our
Bob.
plan.
We've been saying all along, there is a classical language.
In one of our towns.
It's a shared language, there's grammar,
Okay.
there's manners, there's the ability to communicate.
de-escalate that thing.
if you don't have the shared grammar and language and what people expect, you can never get to the nuance of communication. If you remove all of that grammatical ability to communicate, then you can never, it's a conversation between one architect and another architect, but it's not a conversation among buildings. Classical architecture can have a conversation among buildings. It has a grammar, it has manners, it has a certain set of conventions that may even be arbitrary in our culture, right? But they're arbitrary and they're agreed upon. Then yes, you can pare it down a lot. You can pare it down from the front of the building to the back of the building, like you were saying before. You can reduce, you can make it formal, semi-formal, informal. You can have a particular regional language, which is what a vernacular is, that you pare it down to what fits in your region and what fits with your building craft, and all that sort of thing. And that's where craft comes in. But the main thing about classical architecture, classical anything, is that it is a set of conventions that can be made very, very formulaic, but can also be very liberating and open and have a lot of room for variation, like we were saying. It's not just, it's like it's a tree. It's not just the trunk. There are all kinds of branches, but they branch off from the tree. And that's the notion of classicism. That it's, I was calling it the deep structure. You can call it, I guess, something else. But it's the grammar, it's the manners, it's the pure tectonics, what's possible. Which, as Andres was saying, is akin to the notes. Basically you could have a thick wall system that you can put holes in that are arched. You can have columns, which are different from posts. And you can have a frame, like a timber frame or a steel frame. You basically have wall and arch, trabeated, frame. Those are the three, that's kind of like the opera. Then you have different things you can do with it. You can play with one in front of the other. The career stuff that you showed us was amazing variations on the arch and the thickness of the wall. You really got the thickness of the wall. All of that is just part, that's how you get to the poetics, because you've learned to write enough, like Robert, who isn't paying attention, like Robert was saying.
I'm listening.
You learn, you practice, you learn to write, you learn the grammar, you learn to write.
Let's add three things to this formula. Okay, that's what classicism is without any doubt.
Yes.
Okay, so there's another question that follows up. What is our classicism for today and tomorrow? Okay, that's a different question. And furthermore, why is so much of classicism today so bad? Okay, because there's a drugstore in the corner right there that you would say more or less does what you say. It's got moldings and it's got a deep wall and it's got everything, and it's an unbearable piece of shit. So those are two questions. Why?
Because it's the right words in the wrong order. It doesn't have the grammar. It doesn't have what I call the deep structure. It doesn't, which is a linguistic
I got
term.
it. Okay, so
It
what are we
doesn't.
gonna
It
do
doesn't
about
have any. It doesn't appropriately have the nice. It doesn't have. It doesn't
So
pay
it has
attention
a bad
to rhythm.
accent. Are we being snobs?
No, it doesn't.
Are we not recognizing the Oxford accent?
Last night I was talking to Nathaniel, and we looked at the buildings in the project across the street. He had sort of a vague feeling of unease. They didn't really work for him. And I helped him to understand what I meant by the deep structure, by the fact that the two houses, the paired houses, are a little close together. It's a little uncomfortable. You move things apart. You could do things like pulling forward and backward. You could resolve it. It's language. It's a grammar. When we were done, they really pissed him off. Because now he was starting to see what pissed him off, right? It takes no time at all to explain what is grammatically wrong with, I don't know this building, but we could go there and we could actually critique it and say what was wrong with it. And we could do that with many modernist buildings. In fact, when we were doing the tour yesterday, we were walking down the street and seeing these modernist buildings, and they have weak corners, not strong corners. That's a problem. They had an unresolved way of they had two different sort of a massive structure and a planar structure that were not in any reasonable relationship to each other. They had a glazed frame that didn't make any sense. You can actually apply classical rules to modernist architecture, if it's really good, I mean, like Marcel Breuer, Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, they'll come out on top. They'll be successful with these deep rules.
But in
you
2015,
know-
shouldn't we be asking, is the Taj Mahal a classic of its culture?
Yes.
You know, we're a global place. The veneration of the classical Greco-Roman times is based on our Latin and Greek
Absolutely.
system
There's
of
a classical
education.
Moorish architecture. There's a classical Mayan architecture.
I
There's a
would
classical
say
Chinese architecture.
Let's say-
anything that achieves the
The
sublime
question is,
is classical.
Would you,
so where do you draw the edge? Is this classicism? Doesn't this do everything that you, let me say, that's wrong with William?
well, I
But
think,
also doors.
hang on, I don't wanna,
The doors
Not this
is
one,
what-
no.
is what people like.
But would you say that's a bad building?
There's no hierarchy to it.
I wanna take this out of the particular.
But the one that he did, the
Bruce, I think I just want to address the two questions that you had. Why is classical architecture so crap? And what you're going to tell us at length later on today, I'm sure. And the other question is there an architecture, a classical architecture of today and tomorrow? Now, you asked, what is that? And I asked, is there that, and is it necessary? Is it distinct and is it different from what's in the past? Is classicism, though, can we have the same spirit of the same thing in your hated Palladio, in your beloved Plechnik, and mine too, and my beloved Lutyens, and in whatever we produce tomorrow? Is that same spirit, is that same essence flowing through those? And can it exist continuously?
Yes, yes. The mystery,
So it's one thing.
The mystery is, there is a certain fragility to it, in which a small mistake, what I don't like is the fragility of it. Like you can, for example, there's a building down the street here that we walk by, which is a really, really good building. Brick, thick, everything. And it's got two Doric orders that are too deep in. They're just deep into the entablature. Okay, that mistake, which is no more than, honestly, couldn't be more than 5 inches, disqualifies the entire building.
But that's the music, that's the note, the
You see
wrong
what I'm
note in the
saying?
symphony, right?
Do you know the building I'm talking about? It just disqualifies. You can't see past it. It is the thing, and it's
the
it's
symbol.
0.5% of the decisions on that facade. And what I don't like is that fragility. Now, here's what I found.
No, you mentioned that in career too, and you said that was the Ferrari getting close to the edge, right?
Right.
Now, what's the difference between the Ferrari getting close to the edge and pushing the limit, or just something that's wrong, and the fragility of the whole thing falls
Because
apart?
Freire himself said that all that, that came
That what?
at Frere's lecture. He pointed out what was bad
In what?
in Corbeau.
Yeah.
And every single one of those buildings, he said, this is bad, this is bad. That first slide.
No, we're
was
talking about the
discussed.
language now.
But that's a bad thing.
But here's something that's interesting. So one of the problems I had with Palladio, I had several. Not, by the way, I don't have a problem with Palladio. I have a problem with Palladians. Okay, not Palladio. Palladio did what he had to do, and he was incredibly successful, and he did tons of things right. But what he did is architecture in Venice was flowing to Byzantium. It was looking east. All the culture was going there.
Because of tea.
To Byzantium, it was the Muslims were actually the rising thing as opposed to the Middle Ages.
Well,
And what they were doing, you know who was the architect in Istanbul? Sinan. You know who Sinan is? The greatest architect of the Muslim world, which at the time was symmetrical with the Christian world and more civilized. Do you know that Barbaro's brother was the ambassador? Do you know that Palladio knew everything that was happening in Istanbul, but he said, fuck that. Instead of moving forward to what they're trying to solve, and this is something I can show you, they were solving the syntactic problems of classicism and making it incredibly more forgiving. I can show you that. Which is why, by the way, you go to any North African village with fully classical columns of the Muslim order, and there are no mistakes. It's so forgiving. Okay, and it can be made of wood and masonry. I can show you that because I actually figured out what Sinan did.
so there's a
But you know what Palladio does? Unforgivably,
Okay, I
he
get-
turns back to Rome
yeah, I understand.
and looks back
Okay, so
and kills it.
what you're getting at though is the fuzziness. You say let's go back to music, right? Let's go back to the.
Let's go to forgiving music.
What's that?
Fiddling, you know, whatever.
You know what forgiving music is? Jazz is, right?
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say jazz is kind of a perfect analogy.
The perfect
It's
analogy,
structure,
right?
But improvisation.
But those things still have something in common, and it's a matter of choice, right? You have a choice between them. You can go to a very mathematically worked out piece of music, right? You can go to Bach, and you can go to counterpoint, you can go to these things, and he's got it all worked out perfectly mathematically. Everything comes in, it comes out, and everything, right? There's a beauty to that, right? And if the one note gets thrown off, it kind of makes it all.
I was actually thinking more of Jerry Lee Lewis, actually.
But the
Yeah,
thing
great
is,
balls of
there's
fire.
a certain sort of beauty in that. There's a certain sort of beauty in a thing that's a finely worked piece of machinery, right? It's a Swiss watch, right? You throw a piece of dirt in the Swiss watch, what happens? No, I'm saying the Palladio stuff. But it's not to make a value judgment. It's not to say this thing is invalid and it's not part of it. It's just different.
Okay, here's the question Andreas is saying, but what is the future of classicism?
Yeah.
Right? What is, I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
Architecture should respond to its time. Right? I mean, you can change the time, you
It
can,
happens.
you know, it just can't, you can't be building
Or
the
the
same
time will
thing,
crush you.
you know.
Well, you can't, it's just that it can do whatever it wants to do, but it's expensive and it tends to go wrong if it doesn't fit correctly. And what I find is that the classicism of the Renaissance is fantastically unforgiving.
Yeah.
I mean, there are two...
And some of us enjoy that. And some of us enjoy the fact that it's unforgiving because it's a
That's
challenge.
right.
Right?
Okay, but
And now that's not wrong to do that.
No,
Now what you're
100%.
saying though is that perhaps it's best if we go to the stuff that is forgiving right now because
Yeah.
we don't have the skill level
Got
to do it, right? Now that's a different question between saying this is invalid and this is valid. It's saying that
It needs to
they're
be
both valid.
multimodal.
It needs to be
They're both
multimodal.
valid, but I have an answer.
Okay? There's this,
Basically, the Renaissance took a lot of precision from the East. Basically Byzantium took the whole sort of mathematical way of looking at things, everything, sort of the infinite paradise of infinite repetition, of 1,000 paradises, that sort of thing. Took that very precise sort of thing and melded it to a Roman language that was not originally that precise.
Yes.
It was precise in some ways, but it was not precise in that highly mathematical way.
Julius was all
So-
about not precision.
The bigger picture, Bruce, is why are they in Byzantium? Why are they in the Orient? And it's drugs.
Who?
But that's a
That was a trend was T was a drug. It's now been toned down.
Well, fine, but
But so there was this whole illusion going back and forth, and there was all this drug traffic.
right, there was opium, so
My
big deal.
next, and opium too. Opium was just the same as
Because
tea.
I know my family did it, okay?
And my next door neighbor
However,
was a
the
scholar.
point is
My next door neighbor's
that
a
there is
scholar.
a formal relationship where much of the syntax of Renaissance architecture was imported from the East. The original Roman syntax was much more forgiving, much more imitable in the sense that architect Andres is talking about.
right.
Actually, in a weird sort of way, a weird sort of inversion, what Andres is talking about is he's actually saying, go back to the Roman, skip over the Renaissance, go back to the Roman. We can draw out from the Roman and the Greek and the everything.
Let me
And define the Romans more broadly.
Define it more broadly and include Hatra. That really cool, and it just kills me again. I'm gonna
What
get
is
so
Hatra?
mad. That in Hatra, that wonderful,
Libya.
that temple facade with the two different orders in the same level. Brilliant stuff.
It was demolished recently.
Right, ISIS. ISIS or whatever.
You guys
Yeah,
really
I
want
want to bring this back really quick though, back to the
But isn't
Renaissance.
that forgiving?
No,
Isn't that the kind of thing that we could do?
Yes, it is.
I want to say something.
Go ahead.
And I'm like one of the only females in the room, so, no. I don't think anybody in this room has trouble with Renaissance architecture as something that's allowed within classical architecture. And the people who want to practice it, doing the homes that they do and everything else, I don't think anybody, including you, have a problem with that. I think what we're trying to deal with is all of that middle ground, and really the discussion should be on what it includes.
Right.
Well, I think
Not about whether Renaissance architecture works or not, or anything like that, because that's here.
Let-
Eric,
There's a
I
question
think
of
part of
harmony.
it is that forward looking back taught as multimodal, that you don't simply teach the high style, that
Right.
it needs to be taught that there's, basic dumb background.
His treatise?
He brings that up about the modulation of it.
He does
shows
not. He sets it, it's one setting.
There is no.
I've seen him talk about this, and I've seen it. And
That
it shows,
Vitruvius adjusts?
yes, absolutely, because he's shown his own Doric order, and he's shown the Doric order that Duncan Stroik did on his own house, and he's shown how they modulate that.
Okay.
Now, I think the
No,
question-
one thing, then there's another thing. There's the practice and the treatise. It's not the same thing. You know very well that Palladio didn't do what he did. His treatise takes Palladio, takes Vitruvius, and puts it through a Renaissance filter, so all the variation and discretion is removed.
Sure, that may be.
Have you seen his
that
book
may
on
be the case.
Vitruvius?
That may be the case, but it's not what he teaches now.
Well, that's a problem.
Well, that's a problem.
That's a huge problem.
I just want to bring up the point about the Renaissance, that I think.
Well, you're
my
trying to get rid of a problem, because everybody says Notre Dame's great, Notre Dame's great. I'm sorry. The Vitruvius by the dean at Notre Dame removes the slack from Vitruvius.
Well, the
That's
treatise
a
is
huge conceptual problem, I'm
deflecting
sorry.
and not reflecting the practice, right? We're deflecting it. He's making a decision.
He's deflecting
And the
towards the
thing
Renaissance.
is that if the Renaissance has a certain sort of understanding of the cosmos, that it is an intricate working machine of sorts that God continually does. And this was the thought. So when you read the Renaissance treatises on astronomy, right, you see Kepler showing you the universe, and he shows you the musical ratios that the planets go around the sun in, right? Which is actually true.
Yeah.
They actually have to be in a musical ratio, otherwise
But
they
what's
fall
our
apart.
deal now?
But yeah, and that's the point is that we can't necessarily say what they saw as an ideal, and that was something that was in the water, right? So everybody knew the universe is this perfectly ordered thing that, of course, the architecture is going to emulate that perfection, right?
So why are we bringing this forward at all? Because now I'm going to question what Catherine says.
Right.
Okay, like let's just take it radical. Why should that even be brought up front and center, given the fact that it is exactly the cosmos we do not understand today? Okay, why is that up front and center in the education of Notre Dame and in half the architects that practice here? And by the way, and these architects are culturally dominant, and you should see the sneer that they actually deploy when they see something incorrectly done. I'm sorry, but that happens all the time with our towns. And it happened by Liberatos in Ion, okay, not 2 weeks ago.
I want to ask about
Okay,
that.
why should that even be tolerated in a modern discourse?
Because
So yes, I have a problem with
I
orthodoxy.
got taken by Patty this morning around Ion, having heard this.
Yeah.
And I have to say, yeah, there was some of it that's pretty shitty, and some of it's pretty exceptional. And the average is not bad. So I don't understand that.
So the question is, I mean,
Are you looking at
I
specific?
think Vitruvius would have said perfect.
I mean, you
Because
can
that's what the Roman Domus
You
was
can
like.
nitpick almost anything that's built in this day and age, unfortunately. I mean, I always believe, I mean, new urbanism, like the beautiful things, like, not everything's going to be absolutely
But you
perfect.
see, a Roman would have had no problem, but a Renaissance would have had a terrible problem.
I'm not necessarily sure that
There's
that's
all
true one way or the other.
relative.
Well, I'm not sure that the actual Renaissance people would have had problem, but now the people that adore the Renaissance.
The Renaissance, what I'm talking about is effectively numerology.
Yeah.
And it's numerology, the whole thing about, how many 60ths of a module and trying to get the little dentals to line up even, being so precise,
I'm sorry, but how is that going to solve our question? We're here to solve a question.
Yeah.
because I'm getting to
The bigger
that,
picture- the bigger picture stuff.
because you're saying it's numerology. I mean, I'm saying it's numerology. I'm saying that we can probably let go of that incredible precision
Yeah.
and say, it's not bad because, you have the space between two dentals is centered over a column.
Well, what about
That bothers,
what about
having that discussion is
intercolumniation?
crazy.
Let's talk about something right now. I want to drive a truck through it, okay? The Renaissance intercolumniation doesn't allow it, okay? But you know who's the first guy that actually, you know who the first heterodox architect is? That I could find. The east porch of Mount Vernon by George Washington. It's amazing. He just says, I gotta spread it, I gotta stretch it. It's so beautiful that actually George Washington, who was a clear thinking, enough to beat the British Empire, he invented guerrilla warfare, and he said, fine. And by the way, he had Batty Langley.
He did have the French Navy, which really helped, and
Yeah.
I
So he had Batty Langley, I got it. So he got Batty Langley for the side
And the
window,
French Army.
but the back, that porch was the first heterodox order by a name architect that I could find in 5 years of looking.
hard to
Guys,
think.
this question about classicism and whether we're looking forward or we're looking backwards. In my architecture education, it was a similar experience, but Le Corbusier and Picasso, they stood on a shifting time and had studied the great masters. They're able to be critics and say, I'm going to try something new, because they knew the language, they put the time in. You know,
Right.
Picasso says, by the age of 7, I could paint like Raphael, and it took me the rest of my life to learn to paint like a child. You know?
Right.
But, so those guys, we're trying to define our
But
classicism
also,
in terms
okay.
of these modernists. And I think you guys, it may improve the conversation or expand it to the point to say, like, let's not spend so much time talking about Mies, but who were the guys who trained Mies? And who were, and it's the same people you're all interested in, Palladio.
Actually,
Vitruvius.
It's Wagner.
Well,
Mies is
yes,
a
those are
Renaissance
influences.
here. You can go into the 21st century because the leap from the 14th to the 21st is too big. And I talk, you know, like when I speak about heterodoxy and I speak about these names from Notre Dame graduates, people that are perfectly real to me and great, they don't know what I'm talking about. They don't know the names of that generation.
But we've gotten into a naming thing that's so much about being a celebrity. You know, we go off on these tangents about art and architecture and how it's growing and changing. So everybody wants to be a Mies, everybody wants to be a Le Corbusier, you know, everybody wants to be recognized. And that celebrity status of the architect. I mean, when I heard Robert Stern came and spoke to us and said, if you have a repressed ego, architecture is the perfect career for you. And coming out of that man's mouth, you know, it was truth. And it was, we need to step back. These beautiful buildings that are built in 1880 to 1920 by no-namers, it's because they studied pattern books. They studied a classical architecture. They studied rules. And they worked hard every day, like your son playing that clarinet.
But they weren't following the.
And it gets stale, and everybody says we can't just keep producing Beethoven sonatas. We got to do something different.
I agree, because what
And
you're
that's the
saying
looking
is,
forward.
what you're kind of saying is, take the architects out of it. Because one thing that,
No, I love architecture.
well, one thing that I was saying about the classicism, or classicism, is that it lets the buildings talk to each other. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that you don't name the architects and give them credit, but you're also, I think, if maybe I misunderstood you, you're saying look at the building and not the ego, but look at the building and maybe get an idea, get inspired from a building. So you go from building to building, kind of like, what's his name? William Westphal says.
Okay.
You're going from building to building. Buildings are made from other buildings. Buildings aren't made from architects. Buildings are made from buildings that architects make from
And that's how
other
history
buildings.
should be taught, not as a series of geniuses, but
Well, this goes back to the question about art, that a piece of art should be valued intrinsically, right? Who built it is extrinsic to it, and what we have now is a cult of genius. We see it in preservation, which I don't want to go off on that tangent, but we're preserving bad buildings by well-known architects that are really, really bad, that it's not doing what it needs to do. We do the same thing with art, right? As soon as they get a big name, you know, anything by Damien Hirst sells for $1 million.
okay. So if we summarize by saying there's confusion everywhere, you know, like
Well, there's a loss of leadership.
Can we be not confused? Okay, can we be not confused? There's a critique by a professor called Robert Beauregard of the New Urbanism, which is published in the book by Al-Khoury. It was a famous critique, very, very long, and he says he couldn't understand, he's a Marxist academic, and he could not understand why the New Urbanists were successful. And he said, for two reasons. They combine a non-relativistic discourse with a completely pragmatic attitude, which are contradictions. Now, if we actually said, let's do things that actually work and are buildable and people like, pragmatic attitude, and be really clear about it and stop fucking around about, you know, whether it's art or not art or this and that, we would actually possibly have that position, which is almost unassailable because it gives you the, you know, the agility of a pragmatism with actually the non-relativistic discourse, which is so rare.
Yeah.
It's a great combination. And the Beauregard article is really worth reading. Because he tried to attack us, and we all read it and said, wow. He actually ended up praising the New Urbanists.
Yeah, and I think that's a good strategy, Senator. But I think it's entirely valuable, and especially if in the academies that we understand what we're doing. Because when we're teaching,
one of the
when we're
bigger-
teaching the next generation, when we're teaching those skills, what we teach is affected by what we believe. Right? What we pass on and what we say, and you may say, and you point to this, like if Notre Dame says Barron's isn't worthwhile, it's because of what they believe. You say Barron's is worth understanding, it's because of what you believe. And once you have the understanding of what that is, and there's some value to be taken from it, it may not be in entirety, but there's some value taken to it. That's the importance of understanding the principles. It's saying, okay, I understand what is there. And maybe we may call it deep structure, we may call it poetics, we may call it all of these things. But understanding what classicism is, in its very, very simplest essence,
Do you know that
is very important.
Do you know that Gropius, Barron's, and Mies all studied with, Mies, Corbu, and Gropius studied with Barron's? Do you know that Barron's not only did classical buildings, but also the industrial buildings for the AEG and industrial design? If we were to sort of wheel forward, forget Palladio, and just think Barron's forward with his books, and our students learn the plan strategies of Barron's, the cladding strategies of Barron's, we would be so far ahead in terms of engaging, because the students would actually see the AEG factories. They would extend the classical temple. You know, the turbine fabric is a
Problem is we don't see the other Barron's
our
buildings.
students would be so far ahead.
We only see that one. We don't see the
Yeah,
others.
that's the,
We don't.
that
We
is
only see
Barron's
the Barron's building as
Yeah,
a
Barron's-
turbine. That's 100% of the architectural technical.
Barron's building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're marvelous. I mean, his work and Wagner's work,
I
Leibniz,
have a
etc.
book that I just recently got. It's like my favorite book now. It's
Make
like
sure-
Architecture of the early 20th century.
Let's make sure that we
the
have
principles
these.
of parabolic arches.
But you
Kids
need
need
to
to
look
know
at
this.
the map.
Yes.
Let's make sure we get these photos into the
Yeah.
video.
What's my guy saying over here? I
I think we're gonna have to-
agree that it's got to be expanded out of the Renaissance. I agree with that. But I also, the perfect enemy is a good thing going on. Notre Dame is the only program.
Right.
And it's turning out a pretty good product.
A great product.
And I have to say that, as you know, I was on the career review a couple weeks ago, and they're all top students that just to get in there. And
At Yale, you mean?
at Yale,
Yeah.
and there were two students who stood out clearly from all the rest, and they weren't doing classical buildings. And afterwards, I went up to the career and I said, "Why are these two students so good?" And he just turned to me and he said, "Notre Dame."
Yeah, it's true.
So all I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
that I think when there's competition, when we get another Notre Dame, that maybe we'll get more 20th century and 19th century. And
I think what you said about skills and teaching these things is that the modern art world, and this includes architecture, basically has a meat grinder attitude towards things.
Yeah.
We're going to throw everybody into this meat grinder, and hopefully we'll find the one little diamond of genius, right? And you know what? That is, like Gary says, 98% of buildings are shit, and the 1% are this genius, right? But what we could be having instead is teaching actual skills to students and putting out really good
well,
stuff.
that's what I
and
wrote
occasionally
about.
we'll
Roger has
find-
been saying that for like,
Yeah.
One of the things I've been trying to get at, that sort of the bigger picture thing, one of the things I've been kind of fascinated or excited about the heterodoxy kind of concept is the bigger picture concept of basically the strategy of it. That it's, we can squabble about all the details on whether we exactly agree on everything, but if you think about the big picture of like influencing academia, influencing the architecture profession, changing, and we all appreciate classical traditional architecture, but it's never going to get mainstream if we squabble about the details with everybody. It's never going to. If we insist that it's perfect Renaissance, it will never get enveloped by academia or the profession. And so the degree that it's big tent is the degree that it penetrates academia and actually changes.
The real key to penetrating academia is that we all write a bunch of modernist treatises and get tenure in all the schools, and then reveal that we're all classicists. That's the only way to do it. Just pretend we're not.
I can interrupt just a moment. We have the other group that's kind of wrapping up. So I know what the next session is almost like a continuation of what you're talking about right now. So I'm interrupting just for a minute, but what went wrong with classicism? Have you guys been talking about that?
We're done with it.
That was the orthodoxia.
basically dealt with it.
So
I was going to show this strategy worked out. You
in heterodox.
So maybe we can
But if you
continue.
can turn it on, that's the only thing.
Yeah, maybe we can continue that, and if folks want to switch something
Yeah,
over here.
right.
We've got a living tradition, Gibson is going to be giving a bit of a lecture and talking back and forth after that. And I'll make the same announcement here that Andres is going to start with that heterodoxia.
But you need to turn it on.
We can give us about 5 minutes, we can make the
I've never been to an architectural class, but I've only learned from being around you, so it's been fascinating to do that, and I don't know much. But I think that conversation about the jazz and the classical music and the jazz playing off each other, I think it really has something really important to say. And one of the things that you brought up before was we've been really talking about the grammar, and really focusing on the grammar, but the manners and the working for the sublime and the endurance, to me, is what is classicism. In the proportion, I mean, it's the general sense of proportion. When I say I love classical stuff, there's a proportion in there that's very human scale. There's a manners, there is a sense of manners to it, appreciation of me as the audience or me as the customer or the neighbor that I appreciate. And I do think that there is that desire to shoot for the sublime. I mean, just even the willingness to try, to put yourself out there, to try to be beautiful, to try to be inspirational. And I think the grammar we can debate on and have fun with and riff on, or we can be really strong with it. We need to let ourselves have fun with that and say, oh, this is us having fun. But damn it, we do not have fun when it comes to being mannerly. We do not have fun. We are serious about these things. We're so serious about the sublime. We're serious about stuff. And pick your battles, because otherwise the other people just say, these people fight all the damn time.
And one thing that you can do, I mean, there are formal things that you can do to set one thing apart from each other, so that in jazz, it's sort of funny that one player will sort of leave a hole for another player to come into. And in architecture, you can draw a datum line and do one thing below and one thing above. You can play with there are grammatical ways to leave a space for somebody else to play in. There are ways to put buildings next to each other so that things purposefully don't line up. Like if you do a contextual building, there's a building. You do a contextual building that lines up completely, that usually falls really flat. If you go a little bit off, then you're more able to express each other. And there have been some people that have written about that, about the purposeful discoordination. I was talking to Joel Pidell. That's when I went to New York. I talked to him. I mean, I took my train through New York. I talked to him, and we talked about how you can let buildings sit next to each other and be a little bit different, and actually lining up is the wrong thing to do. But there's much more to it than that. Like, for example, you might have a building that has a strong end on either end, and then that lets the next building be much plainer, right? Because they can sort of die into your strong corner. And you can actually have that dialogue between buildings because they understand what they're doing. And that, to me, is I doubt very much that Notre Dame teaches that. I have not heard that.
Yeah, the urbanism factor is what we haven't even necessarily talked about.
What?
The urbanism factor that.
Well, I don't think we can answer anymore. I think we're going to have to put this off.
Well, that's what I'm saying is,
Solve now.
for me, I came traditional architecture from urbanism. It's like, okay, realizing that you don't, I mean, imagine like if every single architect on the street was talking their own language. That's just total chaos. There's something about urbanism that kind of requires speaking the same.
That's about manners, and it's be good neighbors to each other. So anyway, I have to cut this off. I don't know if we answered this question, but maybe it did. So.
Well, now